27. Seem to work for the interests of others while furthering your own. The alliance strategy. The best way to advance your cause with the minimum of effort and bloodshed is to create a constantly shifting network of alliances, getting others to compensate for your deficiencies, do your dirty work, fight your wars, spend energy pulling you forward. The art is in choosing those allies who fit the needs of the moment and fill the gaps in your power. Give them gifts, offer them friendship, help them in time of need, all to blind them to reality and put them under subtle obligation to you. At the same time, work to sow dissension in the alliances of others, weakening your enemies by isolating them, while forming convenient coalitions. Keep yourself free of negative entanglements. The perfect ally. In 1467, Charles, the 34-year-old Count of Charleroi, received the news he had secretly longed for. His father, the Duke of Burgundy, known as Philip the Good, had died, making Charles the new Duke. Father and son had clashed over the years. Philip was patient and practical, and during his reign had slowly managed to expand Burgundy's already impressive holdings. Charles was more ambitious and more warlike. The empire he inherited was immense, including Flanders, Holland, Zeeland, and Luxembourg to the north of present-day France, and the important Duchy of Burgundy itself in northeastern France. Now, as Duke, Charles had the power and resources at his command to realize his dreams of conquest into Germany and beyond. Two obstacles stood in his path. The first was the independent Swiss cantons to Burgundy's east. Charles would have to incorporate this territory by force before moving into southern Germany. The Swiss were fierce warriors who would not take kindly to any invasion. But in the end, they could hardly match the size and power of the Duke's army. The second obstacle was King Louis XI of France, Charles's cousin and arch-rival since childhood. France then was still a feudal state, composed of several duchies like Burgundy, whose dukes owed allegiance to the king. But these duchies were, in fact, independent powers, and could form their own league if the king dared provoke them. Burgundy was the most powerful duchy of them all, and everyone knew Louis dreamed of swallowing it up and making France a united power. Charles, however, felt confident that he could best his older cousin in both diplomacy and warfare. After all, Louis was weak, even a little soft in the head. How else to explain his strange infatuation with the Swiss cantons? Almost from the beginning of his reign, Louis had courted them assiduously, treating them almost like equals to France. There were many more powerful states he could have allied himself with to increase France's power, but he seemed obsessed with the Swiss. Perhaps he felt an affinity to their simple lifestyle. For a king, he himself had rather peasant tastes. Louis also had an aversion toward warfare, preferring to buy peace, even at a high price, than to fund an army. It was imperative that Charles strike now, before Louis wised up and started acting more like a king. Charles formed a plan to realize his ambitions, and then some. He would first move into Alsace, between France and Germany, and swallow up the weak kingdoms in the area. Then he would form an alliance with the great warrior king of England, Edward IV, whom he would persuade to land a large army at Calais. His own army would link up with the English at Reims, in central France, where Edward would be crowned the country's new king. The Duke and Edward would easily dispose of Louis's weak army. The Duke could then march east across the Swiss cantons, while Edward would march south. Together, they would form the dominant power in Europe. By 1474, everything was in place. Edward had signed on to the plan. The Duke began by marching on the Upper Rhine, but just as he began his maneuvers, he learned that a large Swiss army had invaded his home territory of Burgundy. This army was funded by Louis XI himself. By this action, Louis and the Swiss were clearly sending a warning to the Duke that they would not look kindly on any future invasion of the cantons. But Charles had enough forces in Burgundy to drive the Swiss out. He was not a man to provoke in such a way. Both parties would more than pay for their rash invasion. In the summer of 1475, the English army, the largest yet assembled for an invasion of France, landed at Calais under the personal leadership of Edward IV. Charles went to meet Edward to finalize their plans and toast their imminent conquests. He then quickly returned to his own troops, which were marching south through Lorraine in preparation for the great link-up with the English forces at Rheims. Suddenly, some disturbing news reached Charles in the field. His spies at the French court reported that Louis had opened up secret negotiations with Edward. Apparently Louis had persuaded the English king that Charles was using him and could not be trusted. Knowing that England's finances were weak, Louis had offered generous terms of peace amounting to a large annual pension paid directly to the king and his court. He had entertained the English with great feasts of food and ale, and then, to the Duke's utter disgust and amazement, Edward fell for it, signed the treaty, and took his forces home. The Duke had barely had time to get over this bitter news when Louis suddenly sent him envoys to broker a long-term truce between France and Burgundy. This was typical of the king. Everything he did was inconsistent and contradictory. What was he thinking? Signing the truce would mean the Duke could now confidently march against the Swiss, knowing that France would not interfere. Perhaps the king was guided by his great fear of war. Charles happily approved the truce. The Swiss were outraged. Louis had been their friend, and now, at the moment of imminent peril, he had abandoned them. But the Swiss were used to fighting on their own. They would simply have to mobilize every man available. In the dead of the winter of 1477, the Duke, impatient for victory, crossed the Jura Mountains heading east. The Swiss were waiting for him near the town of Granson. This was the first time the Duke had done battle with the Swiss, and he was caught off guard by what confronted him. It began with the alarming bellow of Swiss battle horns, which echoed in the mountains, creating a frightening din. Next, thousands of Swiss soldiers advanced down the slope toward the Burgundians. They marched with perfect precision, packed tight in phalanxes from which their enormous pikes stuck out like the spines of a giant hedgehog in motion. Their flanks and rear were protected by halberdiers swinging spiked battle-axes. It was a terrifying sight. The Duke ordered attack after attack with his cavalry to break up the phalanxes, only to watch them being slaughtered. His artillery was hard to maneuver in the mountainous terrain. The Swiss fought with incredible fierceness, and their phalanxes were impenetrable. A reserve Swiss force, hidden in the woods on the Burgundian right, suddenly emerged and attacked. The Duke's army fell into a headlong retreat. The battle ended in a slaughter, from which the Duke, however, escaped. A few months later, it was the turn of the Swiss to go on the offensive by marching into Lorraine. In January 1478, the Duke counterattacked with his now enfeebled forces. Again, the Burgundians were routed, and this time the Duke did not escape. His body was finally identified on the field of battle, his head cloven in two by a Swiss halberd, his body pierced by pikes. In the months after Charles' death, Louis XI swallowed up Burgundy, eliminating the last great feudal threat to a unified France. The Duke had unknowingly fallen prey to Louis's elaborate plan to destroy him without wasting a single French soldier. Interpretation. King Louis XI would eventually become known as the Spider King, infamous for the elaborate webs he would weave to ensnare his opponents. His genius was to think far ahead and plot an indirect path to his goals, and his greatest goal was to transform France from a feudal state into a unified great power. Burgundy was his largest obstacle, and one he could not meet head-on. His army was weaker than Charles, and he did not want to provoke a civil war. Before he became king, though, Louis had fought a short campaign against the Swiss, and had seen the brutal efficiency with which their phalanxes fought, and how they used their mountainous terrain to perfect advantage. He thought them unbeatable in war. Louis formed a plan to bait Charles into invading the cantons, where his military machine would be destroyed. Understand, the perfect allies are those who give you something you cannot get on your own. They have the resources you lack. They will do your dirty work for you or fight your battles. Like the Swiss, they are not always the most obvious or the most powerful. Be creative and look for allies to whom you in turn have something to offer as well, creating a link of self-interest. To lose such allies of convenience will not destroy you or make you feel betrayed. You must think of them as temporary tools. When you no longer need such tools, there is no love lost in dumping them. Keys to warfare. To survive and advance at all in life, we find ourselves constantly having to use other people for some purpose, some need, to obtain resources we cannot get on our own, to give us protection of some sort, to compensate for a skill or talent we do not possess. As a description of human relationships, however, the word use has ugly connotations, and in any case, we always like to make our actions seem nobler than they are. We prefer to think of these interactions as relationships of assistance, partnering, friendship. This is not a matter of mere semantics. It is the source of a dangerous confusion that will harm you in the end. When you look for an ally, you have a need, an interest you want met. This is a practical, strategic matter upon which your success depends. If you allow emotions and appearances to infect the kinds of alliances you form, you are in danger. The art of forming alliances depends on your ability to separate friendship from need. Think of your alliances as stepping stones toward a goal. Over the course of your life, you will be constantly jumping from one stone to the next to suit your needs. When this particular river is crossed, you will leave them behind you. We will call this constant shifting yet advancing use of allies the alliance game. The key to playing the game is to recognize who can best advance your interests at that moment. This need not be the most obviously powerful person on the scene, the person who seems to be able to do most for you. Alliances that meet specific needs or answer particular deficiencies are often more useful. One of the best stratagems in the alliance game is to begin by seeming to help another person in some cause or fight only for the purpose of furthering your own interests in the end. It is easy to find such people. They have a glaring need, a temporary weakness that you can help them to overcome. Now you have put them under a subtle obligation to you, to use as you will, to dominate their affairs, to divert their energies in the direction you desire. The emotions you create with your offer of help will blind the other person to your ulterior purpose. The artist Salvatore Dali was particularly adept at this version of the game. If someone needed to raise money, say, Dali would come to the rescue, organizing a charity ball or other fundraising event. The person in need could hardly resist. Dali was friendly with royalty, Hollywood stars, socialites. Soon he would be ordering all kinds of elaborate props for the ball. For his infamous Night in a Surrealist Forest in Pebble Beach, California in 1941, which was intended to benefit starving artists in war-torn Europe, Dali requested a live giraffe, enough pine trees to create a fake forest, the largest bed in the world, a wrecked automobile, and thousands of pairs of shoes from which to serve the first course. In the end, the party was a smash and got all kinds of publicity, but, as so often with Dali, the bills far exceeded the receipts. No money was left over for the starving artists of Europe. And strangely enough, all of the publicity was focused on Dali, increasing his fame and winning him more powerful allies. A variation on the alliance game is to play the mediator, the center around which other powers pivot. While remaining covertly autonomous, you make those around you fight for your allegiance. The brilliance of this variation is that merely by assuming a central position, you can wield tremendous power. For instance, you place yourself at a critical point in the information chain, giving you access to and control over it. Or you produce something other people depend on, giving you incredible leverage. Or you play the mediator everyone needs to resolve a dispute. Whatever it is, you can maintain power in this central position only by keeping yourself unentangled and courted by all. The moment you enter into any kind of lasting alliance, your power is greatly reduced. A key component of the alliance game is the ability to manipulate other people's alliances and even destroy them, sowing dissension among your opponents so that they fight among themselves. Breaking your enemy's alliances is as good as making alliances yourself. Your focus here is on stirring up mistrust. Make one partner suspicious of the other, spread rumors, cast doubts on people's motives, be friendly to one ally to make the other jealous. Divide and conquer. In this way, you will create a tide of emotions, hitting first this side, then that, until the alliance totters. Now, former members of the alliance will feel vulnerable. Through manipulation or outright invitation, make them turn to you for protection. Finally, you will of course be attacked for playing the alliance game. People will accuse you of being feckless, immoral, treacherous. Remember, these charges are strategic themselves. They are part of a moral offensive to advance their own interests. Your accusers are trying to make you feel guilty or look bad. Do not let them get to you. The only real danger is that your reputation will eventually keep people from making alliances with you. But self-interest rules the world. If you are seen to have benefited others in the past and is capable of doing the same in the present, you will have suitors and playing partners. Besides, you are loyal and generous as long as there is mutual need. And when you show that you cannot be had by the false lure of permanent loyalty and friendship, you will actually find yourself treated with greater respect. Many will be drawn to your realistic and spirited way of playing the game. Reversal. There are some types with whom any kind of alliance will harm you. You can often recognize them by their overeagerness to pursue you. They will make the first move, trying to blind you with alluring offers and glittering promises. To protect yourself from being used in a negative way, always look at the tangible benefits you will gain from this alliance. If the benefits seem vague or hard to realize, think twice about joining forces. Be wary of people who speak well, have apparently charming personalities, and talk about friendship, loyalty, and selflessness. They are most often con artists, trying to prey on your emotions. Keep your eye on the interests involved on both sides, and never let yourself be distracted from them.